You want to know what I see when I look at you, old man?
Grandmaster Vaughn Crane didn't lower his voice. He wanted the whole room to hear it. And the whole room was listening. He snapped his fingers, pointing his expensive pen directly at the overflowing trash bag.
I see the help. A mop, a gray name tag, and a whole lot of useless opinions about a game you were never good enough to play. Look at you. You empty my trash. You wipe down my board. You're just a dirty shadow scraping gum off the floor, and somewhere along the way you got it in your head that made you one of us.
The old black man in the gray custodian's shirt didn't flinch. He set down the plastic spray bottle. He folded the rag over the rim of his metal cart. Slow and neat, keeping his eyes fixed calmly on the wooden pieces.
I only moved the night back, sir. It was going to hang in 3.
Crane let out a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed off the high ceiling.
The janitor has an opinion! Honey, people like you don't get to think at a table where grown men play. You can take your little rag and get out before I have you thrown onto the curb where you belong.
But Vaughn Crane didn't know that the old man he was humiliating had spent 30 years quietly solving the one position that built Crane's entire legacy. Eli Boone wasn't just a janitor. He was the man about to take the Grandmaster's famous attack and break it in half in front of the world. Man, that moment right there. It gets into your chest, and it sits down, and it stays. This is the long game. I'm Booker, and I go looking for the stories. The powerful spend a lifetime trying to bury the ones with a lock on the door and dirt on top, and a no trespassing sign nailed over the truth. So pull up a chair, put the phone down for a minute, because what this 54-year-old custodian is about to do inside that club, you are going to want to remember where you were when you heard it. He wasn't a fluke. He wasn't a feel-good accident. He was a warning. A warning about how many minds this country has thrown in the garbage without ever once asking what they could do. Let me start where it started. Elias Boone lived alone in a one-bedroom on Rockaway Avenue in Brownsville, Brooklyn, in a building where the radiator banged all winter, and the hallway light flickered like it was thinking about giving up. He was 54 years old. He'd been a custodian at the Kingsgate Club in Manhattan for 11 years. He took the L train and then the 6 train, an hour and 10 minutes each way, and he was never late. Not once. The morning doorman used to set his watch by Eli Boone. The Kingsgate Club was the kind of place that didn't have a sign out front. If you had to ask where it was, you weren't meant to be there. 4 stories of dark wood and green lampshades on Gramercy Park. Founded in 1924. Membership by invitation and a wait list that outlived most of the people on it. There were oil paintings of dead champions on the walls. There was a trophy case with 100 years of engraved silver in it, and there was a room on the 2nd floor, the Grand Room, where the greatest players in the city came to test each other under a chandelier that had watched world champions lose. Eli cleaned all of it. He came in before the members, and he stayed after they left. He learned the building in the dark. He knew which floorboard in the Grand Room creaked, which window fogged in the cold, which Grandmaster left his coffee ring on the mahogany, because he thought that was somebody else's problem to worry about. And every night, after the last member went home and the front rooms went quiet, Eli Boone would push his cart into the Grand Room, and before he touched a single thing, he would stand at the edge of the tables where the games had been abandoned, mid-fight, and he would read them, positions frozen in the middle of a war. Kings still in danger, pawns still marching, and Eli would stand there in his gray shirt with his rag in his hand. and in about 4 seconds his eyes would find the truth of it: who was winning, who thought they were winning. And the one quiet move nobody at that table had seen. Then he'd wipe the board down and go home. Here's the thing you have to understand about Eli Boone, and it's the thing that makes this whole story land like a fist. He was not a man who learned chess. He was a man who had been chess. A long time ago, in a life that got taken from him. Brownsville, in the late 70s, didn't have much, but it had a chess table. 2 of them, actually, in the back of a community room on Livonia Avenue, run by an old man everybody called Pop, Amos Jennings, a retired postal worker with reading glasses held together by tape and a set of wooden pieces so worn the paint was gone off the tops of them. Pop Jennings had a rule: any kid who could sit still and shake a hand could sit down and learn. Didn't cost a dime. Didn't matter what the kid's daddy did or didn't do. Didn't matter what the kid was going home to. Eli was 9 when he wandered in out of the cold to get warm. Pop put him in front of a board to keep him busy. 3 months later, Pop couldn't beat him anymore. 6 months later, nobody in Brownsville could. Not the grown men who'd been playing 40 years. Not the hustlers who came up from the avenue to try their luck for money. By the time Eli was 13, Pop Jennings was taking 2 buses to Manhattan to buy books he couldn't afford, so the boy would have something to chew on. By the time Eli was 15, the same age as another young man you may have heard me tell you about, from another city, in another kind of room, Eli Boone was one of the strongest teenage chess players in the entire country. And almost nobody in the entire country knew his name, because Eli Boone was black, and he was poor, and he was from Brownsville. And in 1988, the American chess world had a very particular idea about what a prodigy was supposed to look like, and a boy from the projects with a mentor who fixed his glasses with tape was not it. Pop believed anyway. Pop believed loud. You are going to walk into their rooms, Pop told him, and you are going to sit down at their boards, and you are going to be so good, so undeniably good, that they will have to say your name. They will hate that they have to say it. Say it anyway. Boy, make them say it. I want you to hold on to that sentence. Because 30 years later, it's going to walk back into this story, and it's going to change everything. Make them say it. Eli did everything right. He won the citywide. He won the state scholastic 2 years running. And when he was 17, Pop scraped together the money. Pop and a church collection and a barber named Curtis, who put a jar on his counter to send Eli to the biggest junior tournament in the Northeast. The qualifier that fed into the national team. The one that put you on the map and got you the invitations and the coaches in the future. Eli went undefeated for 6 rounds. In round 7, he was paired against the golden boy of the whole circuit, a 19-year-old from Connecticut. Private coach. Sponsor. The works a kid the organizers had already decided was going to be the next big American name. Eli took him apart. Slow. Clean. Merciless. 41 moves, and the golden boy tipped his king and couldn't look up from the table. And that should have been the moment. That should have been the beginning. Instead, an hour later, the tournament director called Eli into a back room and told him there had been a complaint, that his play had been too fast, too clean, inconsistent with his background, that someone had seen him consulting a book between rounds which was not against any rule, and which he hadn't even done. There was no proof. There was no hearing. There was a room full of men in blazers deciding, out loud, that a boy like him could not possibly have played like that on his own. They stripped the result. They quietly disinvited him from the team selection, and they let the golden boy from Connecticut move on. Eli Boone was 17 years old, and the chess world looked him in the eye and told him his own mind was a lie. What do you do when the thing you're best at, the one true thing you built out of nothing, you gets taken from you not because you failed, but because you succeeded too well for their comfort? I'll tell you what most people do. Most people break. Eli didn't break. Eli went quiet. He came home to Brownsville. He didn't touch a clock again for a long time. He worked. He worked at a warehouse, then a hospital, then in buildings, always with his hands, always early, always reliable, always a little bit invisible, which after a while stops feeling like an insult and starts feeling like a place to hide. Pop Jennings never stopped being angry about it. Pop wrote letters. Pop made calls nobody returned. And every Sunday until the day he died, Pop set up the board in that community room and taught the next kid, and the kid after that, because the one thing they could not take from him was the giving of it. Pop passed in 2009. Cancer. Eli held his hand at the end. The same way another young man in another city would one day hold his grandmother's. Before Pop went, he pressed something into Eli's palm and closed his fingers over it. It was the rook. One single wooden rook from that old worn set, the paint long gone off the top of it. The felt on the bottom rubbed to nothing. You keep this, Pop said. His voice was almost gone. And you don't. You dare let it end with you. You hear me, somebody gave it to me. I gave it to you. You give it to somebody. That's the whole game. Eli. That's the whole game. Eli put that rook in his pocket. He has carried it every single day for the last 15 years. It's in his pocket right now. In that gray custodian's shirt. On the night Vaughn Crane calls him, the help. So how does a buried prodigy from Brownsville end up mopping the floors of the fanciest chess club in New York? Life. Just life. A guy Eli knew from the hospital took a maintenance job at Kingsgate and put in a word when a second position opened. It was steady. It was union. It had a pension. And there was something else. Something Eli never said out loud to anybody. Something a little bit like a man walking past the graveyard, where they buried his best self. Just to feel close to it, he took the job, and for 11 years, Eli Boone cleaned the rooms where the game he loved was played by people who would never in 100 years have let him sit down. Most of them didn't see him at all. That's not a complaint. That's a fact of the work. A custodian in a place like Kingsgate is furniture that moves. Members walked past Eli having the most private conversations of their lives. And it never once occurred to them that the man wiping the baseboards could hear, or think, or judge, or understand a single word being said over the boards above his head. He understood all of it. He understood more than the members did. And that was the joke of it. The joke only Eli was in on. He'd watched two strong players fight for 2 hours over a position. And he'd already know from across the room, in the first 10 minutes, exactly how it had to end. He never said anything. He learned not to. He'd learned that lesson at 17 in a back room in Blazers. And he had learned it well. He kept his head down. He kept the rook in his pocket. And on the weekends, he went home to Brownsville and did the one thing Pop told him not to let die. Every Saturday morning, in the same community room on Livonia Avenue, different tables now, city-funded, a little grant that came and went. Eli Boone set up the boards and taught the neighborhood kids to play. Free. Any kid who could sit still and shake a hand. Just like Pop, there were usually 6 or 7 of them. And that fall there was Deja. Deja Hollis was 11 years old. 90 pounds of attitude. Hair in twists, with beads that clicked when she moved her head. And she was, without any question, the most naturally gifted chess player Eli Boone had seen since he'd looked in a mirror at that age. She played fast and fearless and rude, slamming pieces down, talking trash, and about half the time seeing 3 moves deeper than anybody had a right to at 11. The first Saturday she came. She beat every kid in the room and then marched up to Eli with her hands on her hips. "You any good?" "Mister, I get B." Eli said, "Bet you. I can beat you." He let her push him around the board for a while, the way Pop used to do for him. Then, gently, with 2 quiet moves, he showed her the whole ceiling of what she didn't know yet, and instead of getting mad, Decha's eyes went wide, and she leaned in over the board. And she said the most beautiful thing a teacher can hear. "Wait, show me that again. Show me that again." That was the sound of the game not ending with him. That was Pop's rook doing exactly what Pop said it would do. But here's the problem. The little grant that paid for the room was drying up. The city was cutting it. There was a letter on the community center wall that fall. I've seen a copy of it that said the chess program, along with 2 others, would lose its funding at the end of the year, unless the center could find a sponsor. No room, no boards, no Saturdays, Dia Holies. And every kid like her was about to lose the one table in the neighborhood where somebody told them their mind was worth something, and 45 minutes away by train, in a club with a 100-year trophy case and a chandelier that had watched world champions weep. Grandmaster Vaughn Crane was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Let me tell you about Preston Ashford. Preston was 27 years old, and he was the reigning champion of the Kingsgate Club. He was an international master with a rating high enough to make people nervous and a chip on his shoulder the size of the building. Because for all his talent, and he had real talent, I won't lie to you, Preston Ashford had spent his whole life being told he was going to be a grandmaster, and he wasn't one yet. And somewhere deep down he'd started to suspect he never would be. That kind of man needs someone to look down on. It steadies him. It's a crutch, and Preston's crutch, for about a year, had been Eli Boone. It started small, the way it always does. Preston would leave his coffee cup on the floor next to the trash can instead of in it on purpose, right next to it, and then call across the room, "Boone, you missed one." He'd wait until Eli was halfway through mopping the grand room and walk across the wet floor in his shoes just to leave a trail. He'd knock a rook off a table as he passed and say, "Oops, the help will get it." Winston Ashford Preston's father was the single biggest patron of the Kingsgate Club. Winston's name was on the tournament fund, on the junior scholarship, una brass plaque by the front door, which meant Preston Ashford could do more or less whatever he wanted in that building. And everyone in that building knew it. And Eli Boone knew it best of all. So Eli said, "Yes, sir." He said it every time. He picked up the cup. He mopped the floor again. He set the rook back on its square. Always on the right square. You notice, always exactly where it had been. Because he couldn't help himself. Because he'd seen the position in the half second it took to bend down. And that, right there, that was the thing that finally set Preston off. It was a Tuesday night. Preston was reviewing one of his own games with 2 younger members. A couple of college kids who followed him around the club like he was a rock star. He had the position set up on a board, and he was explaining, at great length and great volume, a combination he was very proud of. Eli was 3 tables over, wiping down, not looking, not trying to look. And here, Preston was saying, black is just lost. There's no defense. He has to take. And after he takes, the whole king side collapses. It's forced. It's completely forced. There was a pause, and into that pause quietly, not even really meaning to, the way you correct a typo you weren't trying to read. Eli Boone said 6 words. He doesn't have to take. Sir. The room went still. Preston turned around very slowly. Excuse me. Eli should have let it go. He knew he should have let it go. He'd been letting things go for 30 years. He was a professional at letting things go. But the position was sitting right there on the board across the room, lit up under the green lampshade. And the truth of it was so loud in his head that for 1 second, 1 single second, he forgot to be invisible. "The king walks," Eli said. "Instead of taking, Black just moves the king up 1 square. It looks crazy. It looks like a mistake. But then the whole attack has nowhere to go. And a couple moves later, Black is actually winning. You could have heard a pin drop on that carpet." Preston laughed. It was an ugly laugh. Too loud. The laugh of a man who has just been made uncomfortable in front of people he needs to impress. "The janitor," Preston said to the college kids, "has an opinion about the King's Indian." He walked over to Eli's board, arms wide, playing to the room. "Go on. Then, you want to play Grandmaster. Set it up. Show me the king walk. Show all of us. Here's where I have to stop and tell you something about Eli Boone that I want you to really hear. He didn't take the bait. He could have. Every cell in that man's body wanted to pray. 30 years of being told his mind was a lie. And here's a boy, a third his age, handing him the chalk, daring him to prove it. And Eli Boone looked at that boy. And he looked at the rook-shaped weight in his pocket. And he made a decision that I think is the most important decision in this whole story. He decided this was not the room. Pop had told him, make them say it. But Pop also taught him something. Pop learned the hard way. Something Pop said every Saturday. You don't play the move the other man wants you to play just because he's yelling. You play your move. On your clock. When you're ready. Eli set the rag down on his cart. He looked Preston Ashford in the eye, calm. Level. No heat in it at all. And he said, I'm just the custodian. Sir, I don't know anything about it. I'll get that cup you left. And he turned around and pushed his cart out of the room. Preston stood there in front of his little audience. Having won nothing. Having proven nothing. And somehow feeling like he'd lost. Which he had. And a man like that does not forgive you for making him feel that way. He walked away. One of the college kids said, half laughing, he's scared. Preston said, but his ears were red. And everyone in that room, including Preston, knew that, wasn't it? Have you ever had to walk away from a fight you knew you could win, just to protect the little bit of peace you had left? Have you ever had to swallow your whole self, so the people with the power over your paycheck wouldn't see how much smarter than them you actually were? If you have, you already understand Eli Boone better than anyone at the Kingsgate Club ever did. But here's the thing about walking away. Sometimes it doesn't end it. Sometimes it just tells the other man exactly where you're soft. Preston Ashford didn't let it go. Preston went home that night, and he stewed on it. And the next day he did something small and vicious. He mentioned it to Vaughn Crane. Now, Vaughn Crane was a different animal than Preston Ashford. And I need you to understand the difference. Because the difference is the whole disease. Preston was a bully. Loud. Insecure. Cruel in the way of a boy who never got told no. You've met 100 Prestons. Vaughn Crane was a gentleman. That's what made him dangerous. Crane never raised his voice at a custodian that would be beneath him. Crane never left a cup on the floor. Crane held the door. Crane learned the staff's names and used them. Pleasantly. The way you'd name a dog you were fond of. And Vaughn Crane believed. With his whole heart. In what he called standards. He would tell you he wasn't prejudiced. He'd be offended, you asked. He'd point to the club's junior scholarship funded by the Ashfords, administered by Crane, and tell you Kingsgate went out of its way to find diamonds in the rough. He'd tell you he simply believed that chess was a discipline. Une tradition. A thing that had to be earned through the proper channels. under the proper guidance, and that not everyone had what it took, and that pretending otherwise was an insult to the people who did. He'd spent nearly 40 years as a gatekeeper. He decided who got the club's coaching hours. He decided which juniors got recommended to the national program. He decided whose games got analyzed in the club bulletin and whose got quietly forgotten. And in all those years, at all those tables, under all those green lampshades, Vaughn Crane had never once put the full weight of the Kingsgate Club behind a black player. He didn't think that made him a racist. He thought it made him a man of standards. If that phrase sounds familiar to you, if you've heard almost those exact words before, from a professor in a lecture hall, about a 15-year-old with a duct-tape textbook, then you already understand that this is not a story about one bad man at one fancy club. This is a story about a machine, and the machine has a lot of branches. So when Preston came to him, annoyed, and said, "You won't believe this. The custodian is going around correcting people's analysis," Vaughn Crane did not get angry. He got curious in the worst possible way. "Boone, isn't it?" Crane said. The older gentleman. He smiled. That pleasant, terrible smile. "I've noticed he lingers over the boards. I assumed he liked the pictures." The two of them had a laugh about it, and over the next 2 weeks, Vaughn Crane started doing something that was, if you look at it cold, unbelievably petty for a man of his stature and completely, chillingly deliberate. He started testing Eli, quietly, cruelly, in a way that looked, to anyone watching, like nothing at all. He'd leave a book open on a table to a difficult study, a composed position, mate, in a strange number of moves, the kind of thing that takes a titled player real work. And he'd leave it right where Eli would have to clean around it. And then he'd watch from across the room to see if the custodian's eyes stopped on the page too long. They always did. Eli couldn't help it. He'd solved harder in his sleep when he was 12. Crane started leaving little traps in the abandoned positions, moving a piece one square after the members left, so that a game that had ended in a draw now had a hidden win in it, just to see if the boards got tidied back to something suspiciously correct. They did. Eli fixed the piece back without thinking. Old habit. He never noticed Crane had moved it. He just saw the position was wrong and made it right. The way you'd straighten a crooked picture on a wall. And Vaughn Crane, watching from the shadows of his own club, came to a conclusion that both delighted and enraged him. The custodian could play, not had an opinion. Could play. The instincts were real. Which, to a man like Crane, was not a wonderful discovery about a human being. It was a problem. It was a crack in the wall of everything he believed about who belonged in his rooms and who was born to clean them. And Vaughn Crane decided, the way small men in big chairs always decide, that the crack had to be sealed, publicly, permanently, in a way that would remind everyone, the members, the patrons, the college kids, and most of all the custodian himself, exactly where the line was, and exactly which side of it Eli Boone had been born on. He decided to invite Eli to play, and to make sure the whole club was watching when Eli lost. It happened on a Thursday, in the Grand Room, at the busiest hour of the week, and it was not an accident that it happened then. Crane waited until the room was full. Members at half the tables, Preston holding court in the corner, the two college kids, a visiting expert from Philadelphia, even a couple of the younger staff hovering by the door. Eli was changing the liner in the trash can by the window when Vaughn Crane crossed the room toward him, pleasant, unhurried, a cup of good coffee in his hand. "Mr. Boone," Crane said warmly. "A word." Eli straightened up. "Sir, it's come to my attention," Crane said. Loud enough now, pitching it for the room, the way a stage actor pitches to the back row. that you're something of a student of the game, that you have opinions. A few heads turned. Crane smiled. I think that's marvelous. I do. I've always said the beauty of chess is that it belongs to everyone. So I'd like to make you an offer. Eli didn't say anything. He'd been in enough back rooms to know the shape of a trap when it walked up smiling. Founders' Night is in 2 weeks. Crane went on. As you know, I give a lecture, and afterward I play an exhibition. This year, I thought we'd try something a little different. Something in the spirit of the game, belonging to everyone. He took a slow sip. I'd like you to play me. 1 game. On the demonstration board, so the whole club can follow along. You and me, the Grandmaster, and the he paused. And let the pause do the cruelty for him, man who keeps our rooms so beautifully clean. The room had gone quiet. That specific, ugly kind of quiet, where 40 people are pretending to look at their own boards while listening with their whole bodies. You've been watching our games for years. Crane said, here's your chance to be in one. What do you say? Now, I've thought a lot about this moment, because look at what Crane did there. It's a masterpiece of a certain kind of cruelty. He made it a gift. He wrapped a public execution in the language of generosity, so that if Eli said no, Eli looked ungrateful, scared, small proof that he'd been all talk. And if Eli said yes, Vaughn Crane got to demolish an untitled 54-year-old custodian on a demonstration board in front of the entire membership, and remind every soul in that building of exactly where everyone belonged. It was a trap with 2 doors, and both of them opened onto the same floor. I once told you about a young man in another city, a math prodigy, and handed a problem built to break him who stood in a room like this and thought, if I run from this, I run from everything. Eli Boone had already run once. 30 years ago. He'd been running ever since. In a gray shirt, with a rook in his pocket, up and down the L train, past the graveyard of his best self. He looked at Vaughn Crane. He looked at Preston smirking in the corner. He looked at the trophy case with 100 years of other people's names in it, and a very old voice came up in him. Quiet and clear. An old man's voice with tape on his glasses. Make them say it. Yes. Sir, Eli said, I'll play you. Crane's smile widened. Wonderful, he said. Founders' Night. I look forward to it. And as Crane turned to walk away, pleased with himself, satisfied that the crack in the wall was about to be sealed for good, Eli Boone added one more thing. Quiet. Level. Almost polite. What are you going to open with? Sir, if you don't mind me asking. Crane turned back, amused. A child had asked. I imagine, he said. I'll play what I always play. The Crane Gambit. The Crane Gambit. Crane agreed. And there was real pride in it. 40 years of pride. It's never let me down. No. Sir, Eli said. I don't imagine it has. He picked up the full trash bag, tied it neatly, and carried it out of the room he had just been handed. The one thing in the entire world he had been waiting 30 years to be handed. He just didn't let his face show it. Because here is the secret. Here is the thing. Nobody in that club could have guessed. The thing that turns this whole story from a sad little humiliation into something you're going to be thinking about for a week. Eli Boone had spent the last decade of his life in the dark, alone, secretly obsessed with exactly one chess position in the entire world, the Crane Gambit. Let me explain why, and I'll keep it plain, because you don't need to play chess to feel this. When Vaughn Crane was a young man around the same time a 17-year-old Eli Boone was being told his mind was a lie in a back room full of blazers, Crane published an analysis of a sharp, violent attacking line. A pawn sacrifice that led to a ferocious assault on the enemy king. He proved, or seemed to prove, that after the sacrifice, the defender was simply lost. No escape, forced mate, or forced ruin. He published it in the biggest chess journal in the country. The line got his name on it. The Crane Gambit. It became a legend. It became half of who he was. Grandmasters were afraid to face it. Books were written about it. For 40 years, the chess world accepted, as settled fact, that the Crane Gambit won by force, and for the last 10 years, in the dark, in the grand room, after everyone went home, Eli Boone had been quietly proving that it didn't. It started by accident. He'd seen the position on a board one night, left over from a lesson Crane had given, and something about it had bothered him. An itch, the kind of itch that had been going off in his head since he was 9 years old. That's not right. Look again. The attack looked winning. Everybody said it was winning. But Eli's gut, that old buried instinct they tried to bury with him, said there was a door in the wall. So he looked, night after night, year after year, on the backs of receipts, in a spiral notebook he kept in his cart. In his head on the L train at 6 in the morning, he found the defense that had eluded the entire chess world for 40 years, and it was exactly the kind of defense that only a man who learned the game the wrong way could ever have found, because Eli didn't learn from the proper channels. He didn't learn from Crane's disciples, who all knew the line was winning and never questioned it. He learned from Pop, and from taped-up library books written by a dozen different people in a dozen different styles, none of whom told him what he wasn't supposed to try. So Eli tried the thing you're not supposed to try. He walked the king into the fire instead of away from it. And on the far side of the fire, where nobody had bothered to look because everybody knew you'd be dead before you got there, Eli Boone found green grass. The Crane Gambit didn't win. It lost. And the man whose entire name was built on it had been walking past that hole in the wall, teaching it, lecturing on it, terrifying opponents with it for 40 years, and had never seen it. Eli had known this for a decade. He had never told a living soul, and Vaughn Crane had just announced, in front of his whole club, that on Founders Night he was going to walk up to a demonstration board and play the Crane Gambit against the custodian. You want to talk about a man digging his own grave with a golden shovel, baby. Vaughn Crane didn't just dig it. He gift-wrapped it and handed Eli the last bit of dirt. But I don't want you thinking this was easy for Eli, because it wasn't, not even close. And the next 2 weeks nearly ate him alive. That Saturday, Eli almost didn't go to Brownsville. He was tired down to the bone, but he went, because he always went, and because there was a letter on the community center wall with a number on it. The funding was gone at the end of the year. Definite now. The city had confirmed it, and Deja Hollis was sitting at the board waiting for him with her chin in her hands. You look tired, mister, she said. I'm all right. You lose a game or something. Eli almost laughed. Not yet. She beat 2 kids while he set up the other boards, then dragged her chair over to him. They're closing us, she said. She said it flat, the way a kid says a thing she's decided not to cry about. My mama saw the paper. She said this is the last one and then no more Saturdays. Eli looked at her. 11 years old. The best natural talent he'd seen in 40 years. Sitting in a folding chair in a room the city had decided wasn't worth keeping the lights on for. He thought about Pop. Taking 2 buses to buy books he couldn't afford. He thought about the rook in his pocket. He thought about a back room full of blazers, deciding a boy like this could not possibly be as good as she was. "Deha," he said. "Set up the board. I'm going to show you something." And he taught her for 3 hours. And he did not let her see that anything at all was breaking his heart. That night he took the train home and sat at his kitchen table with the spiral notebook and Pop's rook and worked until 3 in the morning, not on the refutation. He knew the refutation cold. He'd known it for 10 years, but on the trap, because it wasn't enough to know the truth. He had to lead the most decorated player in the room straight into it. Willingly. In front of everyone. In a way Crane could not wriggle out of and could not deny. He had to let Vaughn Crane think he was winning. Right up until the moment the floor disappeared. He wasn't alone. Exactly. He had Curtis. Curtis Dell had been cutting hair in Brownsville for 50 years. In the same shop. And he'd been the man with the jar on the counter 30 years ago. The one who helped send a 17-year-old to the tournament that broke him. Curtis was the only living person who knew the whole story. Eli went to see him that week. Sat in the chair he'd been sitting in since he was a kid. And told him what he'd agreed to. Curtis put the clippers down. "You're going to play him." Curtis said, publicly, on the big board, "Yeah, after what they did to you." "Yeah." Curtis was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Pop would have walked to Manhattan on his knees to see this." "I know. You scared?" Eli thought about it. "Not of losing." He said, "I'm not going to lose. I'm scared of what it means when I win. I've been small a long time." "Curtis, small is safe. Small has a pension." He turned the rook over in his fingers. "The second I sit down at that board and do this, I stop being small. And I don't know that man anymore. The one who isn't small. I buried him a long time ago." Curtis picked the clippers back up. "Then it's time to dig him up," he said. "You go dig that man up. Eli. And you make them say his name." And then there was Julian. Julian Vance was 23. A member of the club. One of the younger players who followed Preston around, but Julian had a conscience. And a conscience is an inconvenient thing to have in a room like Kingsgate. He'd watched Preston bully Eli for a year and said nothing. And it had started to sit on him wrong. The way things sit on a decent person who keeps his mouth shut one time. Too many. The week before Founders Night, Julian caught Eli alone in the hallway. "Mr. Boone," he said, and he looked embarrassed. I wanted to say, what Crane's doing, setting you up on the big board like that. It's not right. Everybody knows it's not right. Nobody says it." He swallowed. "You don't have to do it. If you back out, that's not on you. That's on them." Eli looked at this young man, decent, nervous, had ashamed of a room. He was still standing in. "Thank you, Julian," Eli said, "but I'm going to play. Can I ask why?" Eli thought about how to answer that. Then he said something Julian Vance would remember for the rest of his life. "Because 30 years ago," Eli said, "a room full of people watched something like this happen to a kid. And not one of them stood up. And I've spent 30 years wishing just one of them had." He put his hand on the young man's shoulder. "You want to make it right. Don't back me out of the room. Be in it. And when it's over, remember what you saw. And the next time you're in a room where somebody's getting buried, say something." Julian nodded. He couldn't quite speak. "I will," he finally said. "I promise I will. There was one more thing. And it landed 3 days before Founders Night. And it changed the temperature of the whole event. Word went around the club that Emil Novak was coming. If you don't follow chess, that name means nothing to you. So let me put it in terms you'll feel. Emil Novak was 81 years old. He was one of the last living giants of the game. a former world championship candidate, a man who had played the immortals, a walking piece of history, so respected that grandmasters half his age went quiet when he entered a room. He almost never traveled anymore, but he was an old friend of the Kingsgate Club, and he was in New York, and he had agreed to attend Founders Night as the guest of honor and sit at the front for Vaughn Crane's exhibition. Vaughn Crane was thrilled. Of course he was. The greatest living witness in chess was going to be sitting 3 feet away when Crane demolished the custodian. Crane had no idea. Nobody had any idea. Not even Eli, that Emil Novak, almost 40 years earlier, had given a simultaneous exhibition right here in New York. 40 boards at once. And that exactly one of those 40 opponents had beaten him, a skinny teenager from one of the poor neighborhoods, brought in on a bus, who did it with a king walk. No grandmaster in the room could believe, and that Emil Novak had never, in all the years since, forgotten that boy's face. But we'll get to that. What do you think happens when a man who spent his whole life being told to stay invisible finally decides to stand up, and the greatest witness in the history of the game just happens to be sitting in the front row? Stay with me, because Founders Night is here. The grand room of the Kingsgate Club had never looked more like itself than it did that night. They'd set out 150 chairs and a horseshoe. The chandelier was lit full for once, throwing gold on the oil paintings of dead champions. There was champagne. There were patrons in dark suits and members in their best tile, and reporters from 2 chess magazines, and a live stream camera mounted at the back on a tripod, its little red light blinking, because Founders Night went out to the club's followers around the world. At the front, on a low stage, stood the demonstration board, a big vertical board, 5 feet tall. With magnetic pieces, the whole room could read from the back and beside it. A small table with 2 chairs and a chess clock, where the actual game would be played. The moves echoed up onto the big board by a young member acting as the demonstrator, and in the very front row, in the seat of honor, sat Emil Novak, 81 years old, a great stone face and 2 pale eyes that missed nothing. His hands folded on the head of a cane. He had said very little all evening. He was watching everything. Winston Ashford introduced Vaughn Crane, and the room applauded. And Crane took the stage in a beautiful charcoal suit. And for 40 minutes he lectured on the game that made his name, the Crane Gambit. He walked them through it, move by move, on the big board, the way he'd walked 1,000 audiences through it before. The sacrifice, the attack, the way the enemy king got dragged out into the open and hunted down. And here, Crane said, at the end, tapping the board where he always tapped it, black is simply lost. It's forced. 40 years. And no one has ever refuted it. No one ever will. He smiled at the room. Because some things, he said, are simply true. The room applauded again. In the back, by the door, in his gray custodian shirt because he had not been offered anything else to wear. And because, after a while, a man decides to wear the truth of the thing on purpose, Eli Boone stood very still and watched Vaughn Crane tap the exact square where, 10 years ago, alone in this room after midnight, Eli had found the door in the wall. And now, Crane said, the exhibition. This year, as many of you know, in the spirit of the game belonging to everyone, a soft, knowing chuckle rippled through the crowd. I've invited a special opponent, a man many of you see every day, and few of you have ever really met. Our custodian, Mr. Elias Boone, has spent years watching our games. Tonight, he'll be in one. He gestured, gracious as a guillotine. Mr. Boone, please, come up. The room turned, 150 faces, and Eli Boone walked up the center aisle in his gray shirt, past the patrons and the reporters and the blinking red light. And he did not hurry. And he did not shrink. And he climbed the 2 steps onto the stage. And he took his seat at the small table across from a grandmaster. There was scattered applause. Some of it was warm. Some of it was the applause you give a man on his way to the gallows. Out of a kind of embarrassed pity, Preston Ashford, in the second row, was grinning like Christmas. Crane drew white. Of course he did. The organizers had arranged it, and no one questioned it. And it was exactly what Eli wanted. Because white is the side that gets to choose the opening. And Eli needed Vaughn Crane to choose the opening. Eli reached across, before the clock started, and shook the Grandmaster's hand. Firm. Steady. He looked Crane in the eye. Thank you for the game. Sir? Eli said, enjoy it. Mr. Boone, Crane said. Pleasant to the last. It'll be one to tell your grandchildren about. Yes. Sir? Eli said, I believe it will. The demonstrator started the clock. Crane played fast and confident. And for the first 10 moves, the game went exactly, precisely, beautifully where Vaughn Crane wanted it to go, because Eli Boone let it. He steered into it. He played the moves of a man walking, wide-eyed, straight into the Crane Gambit, straight into the most famous killing line in modern chess. The line Crane had just spent 40 minutes proving was a forced win. Up on the big board, the position bloomed into the shape. Every strong player in that room recognized instantly. Murmurs ran through the crowd, because they all knew this position. They'd all seen the lecture. They knew what came next. Crane sacrificed the pawn, the famous sacrifice, the one with his name on it, and the crowd made a low sound. On. Oh. The sound of watching a magician do the trick. They came to see, and then Vaughn Crane attacked. It was ferocious. It was everything the legend promised. Piece after piece came crashing toward Eli's king, exactly as advertised. The assault Crane had used to break grandmasters, being unleashed at full strength against a custodian on a demonstration board in front of the world. By move 18, it looked like a massacre. Eli's king was dragged out of its shelter, exactly the way Crane's lecture said it would be. His position looked ragged, torn open, indefensible. Up on the big board it looked to 150 people, like a man being executed in slow motion. Preston Ashford turned to the college kid next to him, loud enough for the front rows to hear, and said, somebody should tell the janitor you can concede whenever you'd like. Spare himself. A few people laughed. Vaughn Crane heard it. And Vaughn Crane, a gentleman. Remember, a man of standards, allowed himself, for the first time all night, a very small, very satisfied smile. He leaned back in his chair. He glanced at Emil Novak in the front row, as if to say, you see. The old man in the front row did not smile back. The old man was leaning forward now, both hands on his cane, his pale eyes fixed on the small figure in the gray shirt, because the old man had seen this before. Here is the moment. I want you to slow down with me here, because this is the moment the whole thing turns. And I don't want you to miss a second of it. It was move 19. Eli's king was in the open. The attack was one move from breaking through to everyone in that room, to the reporters, to the live stream, to Preston, to Crane. The custodian was finished, and Eli Boone sat very still. And he looked at the board, and then he did something that made 150 people go silent all at once. He picked up his king, and instead of running it back toward safety, instead of doing the human thing, The sane thing. The thing every instinct in the game screams at you to do. He walked his king forward. Up the board. Toward the fire. Toward Crane's whole army. One square. Into the teeth of it. The room made a sound of pure confusion. It looked insane. It looked like a blunder. It looked like a broken man giving up and shoving his king into the fire to end it. Up in the second row, Preston laughed out loud. He's cracked. Preston said, he's just lost the plot. But down in the front row, Emil Novak's mouth had come open. Just slightly. And on the stage, the small, satisfied smile on Vaughn Crane's face had frozen. Because Vaughn Crane, of all the people in that room, was the one man who understood chess deeply enough to feel a half-second before his conscious mind caught up that something had just gone very, very wrong. He looked at the board. He looked at where the king had gone. And he started to calculate the attack he had been about to land the breakthrough. The killing blow. He reached for it in his mind. And it wasn't there. The king wasn't where it was supposed to be. The whole beautiful force sequence he'd relied on for 40 years needed the enemy king to run away. It had never, in 40 years, occurred to him that the king could walk toward him. Because that was suicide. That was against every principle. No serious player would ever. Crane's face went pale. He sat forward. He put his hand over his mouth. And under the chandelier that had watched world champions weep, in front of his whole club and the greatest living witness in chess, Vaughn Crane began, in real time, to realize that his life's work had a hole in it. Eli Boone reached out and pressed the clock. And then, for the first time all night, quietly, so quietly, he began to attack. Let me tell you what happened next in plain words, because you deserve to feel it. Even if you've never touched a chess piece, that king walk was not a blunder. It was a door. By walking the king one square into the fire, Eli had stepped it onto the one square in the entire position, where none of Crane's attacking pieces could actually touch it, a blind spot, a dead angle, that existed only because of the exact way Crane had thrown his own pieces forward in the sacrifice. Crane's attack had overextended. Every piece was committed, lunging, off balance, and now that the king was safe, impossibly, insultingly safe, right in the middle of the enemy army, all of Crane's attacking pieces were suddenly just stranded, far from home, undefended, out of squares. And Eli Boone, who had known this position in the dark for 10 years, began to pick them off. Move 20. He struck at the center, and one of Crane's proud attacking pieces had nowhere good to go. Move 21. A quiet little move, not a check, not a capture, just a small, ugly, the perfect move that took away the one escape square Crane was counting on. The kind of move that only looks like nothing until you realize it's everything. Somewhere, in the third row, a titled player who'd been silent all night whispered, "Oh my God," loud enough for the stage microphone to catch it. Move 22. Crane tried to complicate. He threw another piece forward. Desperate now, trying to conjure the attack back to life. Eli didn't flinch. He'd seen this try. He'd seen every try. He met it with a counter-sacrifice of his own, gave back material. Calm as a Sunday. Because he'd calculated to the end, and he knew that on the far side of it, Crane's king was the one out in the open now. The room understood. All at once, what it was watching, the most famous attack in modern chess, the Crane Gambit. The forced win. The thing no one had refuted in 40 years was being refuted. Right now, on the big board, by the custodian. And it was worse than that. Because it wasn't just that Eli was winning this one game. It was that every single person in that room who understood chess could now see it, see the hole, see the door, see the truth that had been sitting in that position for 40 years, and see that it must have always been there, that the Crane Gambit had never won, that it had been refutable the whole time, that Vaughn Crane had built his entire name, his legend, his 40 years of gatekeeping and standards and lectures on a thing that was not true, and that a 54-year-old man who emptied his trash cans had known it, and known it better than he did. Vaughn Crane stopped playing well. You could see it happen. The gentleman came apart. His hands weren't steady anymore. He was down in the position, and he knew it. And worse than the position, he could feel the room. He could feel 150 people slowly understanding that the Emperor's most famous suit of clothes had never existed. He looked out at the crowd, at the patrons, at the reporters, at the blinking red light of the camera sending this out to the world. And then he looked back at the board and he could not find a single move that saved him. Eli Boone played on. Calm, unhurried, the same pace he cleaned the floors at. He was not cruel about it. That's the part that got people in. He didn't gloat, didn't rush. It didn't perform. He just kept making the truest move on the board, one after another, the way Pop taught him, until the truth was so total there was nothing left to argue with. At move 31, Eli slid his queen quietly across the board and set it down. It wasn't even a loud move. There was no crash to it. It just closed the door. Every one of Crane's remaining tries died on the same square. Checkmate was 2 moves away and unstoppable. And there was not one single thing the Grandmaster could do about it. The demonstrator up at the big board hesitated, hand frozen, checking and rechecking that he'd read it right. The whole room held its breath, and Eli Boone looked up, across the small table, at Vaughn Crane, and he did not say checkmate, and he did not say I win. He said, quietly, so quietly, the thing that will be quoted in that club for the next 100 years. You had it backwards. Sir, the attack was never winning. The king was supposed to walk toward you. I found it a long time ago. He paused. I just never had a reason to say so out loud. And then, gentle, almost kind, he added, you can resign whenever you'd like. Spare yourself. The exact words Preston had thrown at him 20 minutes before. The room heard it, and the room understood it, and 150 people made a sound like the air going out of a building. Vaughn Crane did not resign. He couldn't move. He sat there, gray, staring at the board, his eyes running back and forth across the position, checking every line, looking for a mistake in Eli's play, looking for any escape, any crack, anything at all. He found nothing. There was nothing to find. And into that silence, an old man stood up in the front row. Emil Novak rose slowly, both hands on his cane, 81 years old, and the whole room turned to him. Because when Emil Novak stands up, you turn. He looked at the demonstration board for a long moment, and then he began, all by himself. To clap, slow, deliberate. Each clap landing in the silence like a struck bell. Then the titled player in the third row stood and joined him. Then Julian Vance, on his feet, clapping so hard, his hands must have hurt. Tears standing in his eyes. Then a whole row. Then half the room. Then all of it patrons, members, reporters. The college kids who'd laughed 20 minutes ago now on their feet applauding a custodian. Because there are some things so true that even the people who don't want to believe them cannot keep sitting down. Preston Ashford did not stand. Preston sat in the second row with his mouth open and his face white, watching the whole world he was born on top of turn upside down. And Eli Boone did not celebrate. He didn't smile. He didn't raise his arms. He stood up from the small table, and he reached into the pocket of his gray shirt, and he took out a single worn wooden rook, the paint long gone off the top of it, and he set it down gently on the corner of the small table, facing out toward the room, for Pop, so Pop could see it, so Pop could be in the room. Then he stood there, hands at his sides, in front of 150 people on their feet, and he let himself, for the first time in 30 years. Basine, Emil Novak stopped clapping. He walked forward, slowly, up to the edge of the stage, and he looked up at Eli Boone, and he studied his face for a long moment, the way you study a face you have been trying to place for almost 40 years, and the whole room went quiet again, because they could see the old man was about to say something. "I know you," Emil Novak said. His accent was thick and old, and his voice was soft. But the room was so silent you could hear every word. "I have been sitting here for 1 hour," Novak said, "trying to understand why I know your hands, the way you move the pieces. I played 10,000 players in my life. I forget them all." He shook his great old head slowly. "But there was a boy, long ago, a junior tournament, across the ocean. No. He stopped himself. He looked harder. "Here, in this country, I gave a simultaneous exhibition, a very long time ago, in New York, 40 players at once, and there was a boy, maybe 15, 16, from one of the poor neighborhoods. They told me, brought in on a bus, his pale eyes fixed on Eli's. That boy beat me, in front of everyone. He was the only one of the 40 who beat me, and he did it with a king walk, a crazy, beautiful king walk that no one should have found." The old man's voice cracked, just slightly. "I asked the organizers his name. I wanted to remember it, and they told me not to worry about him." Novak's jaw tightened. Almost 40 years of an old man's regret behind it. "They told me he would not amount to anything, that his kind never did." He looked up at Eli Boone, custodian, 54 years old, standing on a stage in a gray shirt with an old man's rook beside him. "It was you," Emil Novak said. "Wasn't it? It was you." And Eli Boone buried prodigy, invisible man, the boy they threw away, looked down at the greatest living witness in the history of the game. And after 30 years of silence, he finally, quietly, said his own name out loud. "Elias Boone," he said. "Yes, sir, it was me." Emil Novak turned around, slowly, and faced the room, and when he spoke, he did not speak to Eli. He spoke to all of them. The patrons, the members, the reporters, the blinking red camera at the back. "You should understand what you just watched," the old man said. "Not the game. The game was only beautiful. I mean the rest of it. That man," he lifted his cane an inch toward Eli, "should have had my life. He was better than I was at 16 than most masters are at 40. He should have had the coaches, the sponsors, the invitations, the years. He should have been a champion." His old voice went hard, as a stone, and instead he has spent 30 years emptying your waste baskets. Because 30 years ago, men in a room decided a boy from the wrong street could not really be that good, and so they made sure he never got the chance to prove they were wrong. He let that sit in the silence. "You gave him a mop," Novak said, and he still refuted the most famous attack in modern chess in his spare time. In the dark, alone, with no one to talk to. Imagine what he would have done if you had given him a chance. He shook his head. I have been ashamed of this game exactly once in my life. It was the day they told me not to remember his name, and I have been ashamed of it again tonight. Watching how you treated him before you knew what he was, as if what he was should have ever mattered at all. Nobody moved, and then Emil Novak turned to Vaughn Crane, who was still sitting at the small table. Gray, unable to lift his eyes off the board. "Vaughn," Novak said, and his voice was almost gentle now, which somehow made it worse. "Is the refutation sound?" The whole room held its breath. Crane did not answer. He stared at the board. 5 seconds. 10. "Vaughn," Novak said again. "Firme. You are a Grandmaster, and this is your line. You, of all people, can see it. I am asking you in front of these witnesses, is the boy's refutation sound?" Vaughn Crane finally lifted his head. He did not look at Eli. He looked at the board, and then at the room, and then at the camera. And his jaw was so tight the words had to be dragged out of him one at a time. Against his will. Against 40 years of everything he'd built. "The defense," Crane said, "is sound. The Gambit does not win." A muscle jumped in his cheek. "It never won." He said it like each word was a tooth being pulled. And Emil Novak nodded. "Was? Thank you," he said. "That took more courage than the game did. Now, I want to be honest with you about what justice looked like here. Because black stories are not fairy tales. And this one isn't either. Vaughn Crane did not get dragged out in handcuffs. Small men in big chairs rarely do. But by the end of that week, the man's whole world had quietly rearranged itself. And it never went back. The 2 chess magazines in the room ran the story. Then the big ones picked it up. Then it left chess entirely and went everywhere. Because it turned out the world was extremely interested in a 54-year-old custodian who'd refuted a Grandmaster's life's work on a live stream and turned out to be a buried prodigy the sport had thrown in the trash 30 years ago. The clip of the king walk, that impossible, insulting, beautiful king walk went out to millions of people who had never watched a chess game in their lives and never forgot it. And with the story came the questions, the right ones. For once, who was the boy on the bus in 1988? What happened to him? Who decided he'd never amount to anything? The National Chess Federation. Facing the whole world, asking, did the thing institutions only ever do when the whole world is watching it opened an inquiry? Not into Eli, into what had been done to Eli. They pulled the old records from that junior tournament, the complaint, the stripped result, the quiet disinvitation, the names of the men in the blazers, and what they found could not be defended. And this time, there was no back room to hide it in. The Federation issued a formal statement. It acknowledged, in plain language, that Elias Boone had been wrongfully accused, wrongfully stripped, and wrongfully denied that the accusation had never rested on evidence, only on assumption, and that the assumption had a name, and the name was the thing the game had spent decades pretending it didn't have. They restored his old result, 15 years too late for Pop to see it, 30 years too late to give him back his life. But they said it, out loud. In writing, they made them say his name. The refutation, the 10 years of work. The door on the wall was written up under one name, and one name only. Boone. Emil Novak insisted on it personally. And no one was going to argue with Emil Novak. It ran in the biggest journal in the game. The same journal that had published the Crane Gambit 40 years earlier. The old attack and its refutation, side by side. The legend and the truth. In the same pages at last. And for the rest of time, any young player who studies that line will read 2 names in the notes. The Grandmaster who made the attack, and the custodian who broke it. Vaughn Crane resigned his position at the club within the month. He said it was for personal reasons. Everybody knew what the reasons were. He is still, technically, a Grandmaster. You can't take the title back, but something got taken from him anyway. Something he'd valued more than the title. The certainty. The certainty that he'd always known who belonged in his rooms and who was born to clean them. That certainty was gone. And a man like Vaughn Crane doesn't know who he is without it. As for Preston Ashford, Preston learned the fastest and hardest lesson of his young life, which is that a name on a plaque only protects you until the whole world is looking. The clip of him telling the custodian to concede. Right before that custodian dismantled a Grandmaster. Followed Preston everywhere. His sponsors got quiet. His invitations thinned out. The club, under new pressure and new eyes, could no longer look the other way about how the Ashford boy treated the staff, and about a lot of other things besides. Winston's money bought a lot of things over the years. It could not buy back that room. Julian Vance kept his promise. He was the one member of that club who stood up in the meetings afterward and told the truth about the year of bullying he'd watched and said nothing about, and in doing it, he became, quietly, the kind of man he'd been ashamed of not being. Sometimes that's how it works. Sometimes a person watches an injustice get answered, and it gives them the nerve to answer the next one themselves. But here's the part I actually came to tell you. Because if this story ended with one bad man losing his job, it wouldn't be worth an hour of your evening. Punishing one Vaughn Crane doesn't fix anything. There's always another Vaughn Crane. The machine has a lot of branches. The thing that matters is what Eli Boone did with the door once it finally opened. He didn't take a coaching job at Kingsgate. They offered. Oh, they offered. Suddenly desperate to have their custodian's name attached to the club. He turned them down flat. He didn't cash in on the fame. There were offers for that too. What Eli Boone did, the week the Federation restored his name, was walk into the community center on Livonia Avenue in Brownsville. The one the city was closing at the end of the year. The one with the letter on the wall, and stand in front of the little grant board where Deja Hollis and 6 other kids were about to lose. The only table in the neighborhood that told them their minds were worth something, and he made a phone call. Emil Novak took that call personally. So did half the chess world. Once they heard what it was for, within a month, there was a foundation. Eli named it himself. And he named it the only thing he could have named it. The Amos Jennings Chess Fund. Everybody just calls it Pops. It kept the Livonia Avenue room open that first. And forever. But it didn't stop there. It put free boards and real coaching into rec centers and schools all over Brownsville. And then East New York. And then further. It sent kids from the wrong streets. Kids with the wrong last names. Kids brought in on the bus. To the tournaments that used to throw boys like Eli in the trash. And it put them there with somebody standing behind them this time. Somebody who knew exactly what those back rooms could do. And would walk to Manhattan on his knees before he let it happen to one of his kids. They started calling it the buried belt in the chess press, a nod to all the talent this country digs a hole for and covers up. Eli didn't much like the name. He said it wasn't about what got buried. It was about what got planted. I want to leave you where it really ends. Not on the stage. Not in the headlines. On a Saturday morning. In a community room on Livonia Avenue. With the good boards now. And the lights the city can't turn off anymore. Eli Boone is 54 years old, and he is sitting across a chessboard from an 11-year-old girl with beads in her twists that click when she moves her head. And she is about to beat 2 kids and then drag her chair over and demand a game. Because that is what Deja Hollis does. She's better than she was 3 months ago. A lot better. She's starting to see the deep things now. The things under the surface. And every so often she plays a move so far ahead of her age that Eli has to sit back and just look at her. The way an old man with tape on his glasses once sat back and looked at him. "You any good yet?" "Mister," she says, sitting down, hands on her hips. She said it every Saturday for 3 months. It's their thing now. I get boo. Eli says, "I saw the video." Deja says, "Sudden and serious. The one where you beat that man. My mama showed everybody at the church. Everybody." She narrows her eyes at him. "You never told me you was famous." "I'm not famous. Baby, you beat a grandmaster. So will you?" Eli says, "One day. And when you do, there's going to be people in that room already decided you can't be calmed. People who take one look at you and think they know exactly what you are." He leans in over the board. "You know what you do to people like that." Deja knows this one. He's told her before. She recites it back to him, half rolling her eyes. The way an 11-year-old does with a thing she pretends is corny but is already carved into her bones. "You be so good, they gotta say your name. You be so good, they gotta say your name." Eli says, "That's right." And then Eli Boone reaches into his pocket, the same gray shirt. He still wears it. He wears it on purpose now. And he takes out a single worn wooden rook. The paint, long gone off the top of it. And he sets it down on Deja's side of the board. "That's yours now," he says. Deja looks at it. It's all old and messed up. She says, "Somebody gave it to a man named Pop." Eli says, "Pop gave it to me. Now I'm giving it to you. And one day, when you find a kid nobody's looking at, a kid sitting in the cold trying to get warm, you're going to give it to them." He closes her small fingers over it. The same way an old man closed his over Eli's. The same way Eli held his grandmother's no. The same way a lot of people, in a lot of rooms, have quietly handed the one true thing to the next set of hands. That's the whole game. "Deja," he says, "you hear me? That's the whole game." Deja Hollis holds the rook. She's not rolling her eyes anymore. She looks at it. And she looks at him. And something passes between them that is older than both of them. "Okay," she says quietly. "I promise." Then she puts the rook down carefully by the side of the board, facing out, so it can watch the way Eli set it, facing the room, the night he stopped being invisible. And she looks back up at him, and her attitude comes right back. All 90 pounds of it. "Now set it up," she says. "I'm still gonna beat you." And Eli Boone smiles. A real one. The first one in a long time. He sets up the board. Elias Boone didn't walk up onto that stage to destroy Vaughn Crane. He'd had 30 years to want revenge. And revenge, it turned out, was never the thing. He walked up there to say his own name out loud. One time, before he handed the game to the next set of hands, to prove that the mind he'd built in a cold community room and on the L train at 6 in the morning and alone in the dark after everyone went home, that it was real. That it had always been real. That it had been real the whole 30 years they spent telling him it wasn't. And when that room finally rose to its feet, it wasn't because they were surprised a custodian could play chess. It was because they were ashamed of how long it took them to look. So let me leave you with the question, because you knew I would. How many Elias Boones are out there right now, emptying the trash in the rooms where they should be sitting at the table, cleaning the floors of the buildings they should own, sitting in the cold, trying to get warm, next to a board nobody's ever going to hand them? How many minds has this country decided it already knows the size of, without ever once asking? And when you're in the room, the meeting, the classroom, the club, wherever your room is, and you watch it happen to somebody, the quiet burying, the polite version, the man of standards version. Are you going to be one more person who looks at their own board and says nothing? Or are you going to stand up? If this story hit you, if you've ever been the person in the room nobody thought to look at, the one they decided about before you ever opened your mouth, get in the comments and tell me. Tell me your name. Tell me what they said you'd never amount to. And tell me what you did anyway. I read every single one. And if you know somebody who needs to hear this tonight, somebody who's been small a long time because small was safe, send it to them right now. Before you close the app, because talent doesn't wait for permission, and neither should you. This has been The Long Game. I'm Booker. Go. Make them say your name.